All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sacramental Charismatic podcast. My name is Wes. I'm joining you all the way from Vancouver, Washington. And I just want to start off by saying that we have a exclusive, unique intro music given to us by John Barnett. And it's just for us. The John Barnett, one of a kind intro tailored for the Sacramental podcast. So we just want to state that from the get-go. Thanks so much, John. We really appreciate
technically, it's on his new album, but he gave us.
Oh, I thought it was just for us. Okay. Well, we're gonna just say
you thought you were so special.
I thought we were that special. Okay, never mind.
You thought John Barnett had his guitar and he was like coming up with chord progressions
just for the Sacramental podcast.
What would go with Wes's voice? Yeah.
Well, I do know that it's still an honor to get his permission to use his music, so we'll take that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, when he offered, I was like, you had me at hello. Yes. So shout out to John Barnett. And if you listeners don't know who John Barnett is, he and his wife have, in the Vineyard movement and beyond, have contributed some of I'd say the biggest worship songs. Holy and Anointed is one that I know a lot of people have sang both in the Vineyard and outside. And then they've written a ton of other songs, obviously as well. Breathe would be one of her songs, but yeah, they're legends. So shout out to John. John, come and be on our podcast.
Yeah. Why haven't you invited him, Luke?
I have. I just need to follow up.
John, I'll reach out to you.
Yeah, John, when that guy who you normally delete his emails from reaches out to you, please let him in. So, yeah.
Well, hey, Luke, how's Red Bluff? How's the 100-degree weather treating you?
It's cooling off, man. It was 93 today. It's been.
Oh, dang. Okay.
I know. Well, we had about 2 weeks of 80s. It was kind of nice, and probably another couple of weeks we'll have 9 months of why it's awesome to live here, because it'll be nice and perfect and not snowy. Are you excited about your blizzards? Yeah, we have about 9 months of nice weather. We had 1 day of snow.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're about to hit the rain, so really looking forward to that. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Cannot wait.
8 months of rain.
Well, anyways, 8 months. Well, it's 6 months, but who's counting? All right. Well, today we are going to be talking about depressing weather, a little bit more on the somber side. And we're going to talk about why pastors are quitting. There was an article that came out a couple months ago that sort of blew up and went viral about a Presbyterian pastor that wrote about why he was quitting. And Luke actually also wrote a follow-up pastor giving his side and perspective on the matter. And so we just wanted to dive a bit deeper in today and just all the challenges that are coming with pastoring right now and why so many pastors are wanting to quit. So we'll link those articles below. And so give them a read if you want to now before. But otherwise, we just wanted to dive in a little bit more. So Luke, when you read that article, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, he actually wrote it on the 2nd of September in the last, I don't know.
Oh, is it that soon?
Yeah, 6 or 7 days it's been shared and reshared, and a lot of other people have written. It was interesting. I on Sunday afternoon last week, I wrote something called "The Worst Part of Pastoring," kind of addressing one of the challenges that I think pastors face. I didn't even know about this other article, and then after I posted it the next day, I think I was on Monday, I saw it. And so this article is called "Departure: Why I Left the Church," and it's written by a guy named Alexander Lang, who was part of a Presbyterian church. From my understanding, it would be a progressive Presbyterian. I want to say PCUSA, I think, but I'm not positive about that. But he talked about the great pastor resignation, quoting from Barna, that did a national survey of pastors in March of 2022. 42% of pastors were considering quitting, and the reasons were, number one, the immense stress of the job. the feeling of loneliness and isolation, the political divisions that exist, the unhappiness with the effect that pastoring has on the pastor's family, and the feeling of not being very optimistic about the future of their church. I'm not laughing because those are funny, but it's like, oh, like I'm surprised that not everybody felt that way. Yeah, and then it goes on to just talk about the challenges that he has, and he mentions how, the feeling of having 1,000 bosses. He was in a church of about 1,000 people, so he just felt like he had 1,000 people that he was constantly having to report to. Talks about the unrealistic expectations, both financially as well as emotionally, and he basically kind of wraps his article up with saying that at the same time, pastors are expected to be professional speakers, CEOs, counselors, fundraisers, human resource directors, master of ceremonies, and pillars of virtue. And they have to do that all for a very low financial, I guess, side of things. So, yeah, I think that was kind of the bulk of his article. And it was really interesting because it kind of got shared a lot on social media. I know you got any thoughts on those things? I think you read the article, right?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I have a ton of thoughts. I mean, my takeaway is mostly just a feeling of sadness. Just sort of hearing from him, and then also like reading all the stats about pastors just wanting to resign, and it felt like another layer, just like with all the stuff coming to light with so many abusive stories in the church with pastors just falling by the wayside, in the terms of just moral stuff, just affairs, sexual abuse, stealing churches, abusing staff. Shout out Alan Scott and Jeremy Riddle, but
body shaming, not allowing people to be
body shaming, just crazy. So it was sort of like there's pastors that, you've got all these narcissistic pastors and pastors that are just really abusing their power, and then on the other hand, you've got these pastors that seem to be just being as faithful as they can be, and are just suffering so immensely, just trying to be faithful and being the best pastor and shepherd and all these things. I mean, all those things you listed is just crazy. There's no ways one person can do all of those things. And so there's so many pastors that are in that boat trying to be faithful, and they're suffering, so much more. And so that's what really just saddened me to read that. And so that was my initial just like, saddened me, and also just made me angry. Angry that there's pastors that are abusing their power and still getting away with it, and then pastors that are being faithful and are quitting and just saying, I can't do this anymore. So yeah, I mean, I can't remember his name, but he's like sort of blown up on Twitter. But there's that pastor that literally quit his pastoring and now helps pastors get jobs in corporate America. He's made a whole side business from helping pastors transition out of, because there's such a need to find regular jobs because pastors are quitting so often. So anyways, that was my initial takeaway. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I felt a lot of those same feelings. I mean, it's not, in many ways, I think it's not news. I mean, I can think of probably the last 5 years, predating COVID, there's been definitely a feeling of exodus. A lot of people who have, done the pastoring thing and just decided, it's not for me, and have transitioned out. In the last 3 years, I feel like, you mentioned, I mean, because part of it's like some of these pastors, I'm glad they're out, right? I mean, there's pastors who have been caught in scandalous things. I mean, gosh, my wife and I were just talking to some friends about this the other night, that in the last 3 years, for sure, I mean, I think the majority of pastors that I kind of used to have a pretty, I talk to regularly, most of them have quit. They're not pastoring anymore.
Wow.
And a lot of them seem a lot happier, to be honest, which I'm like, that's interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's definitely been there's been a fair amount of a lot of the folks who have commented on the things that this particular article address. You either see two things. You see people who are like, sharing it like, yeah, pray for our pastors, or other pastors who are like, yeah, I can relate to this. It's really challenging. And then there's other people who have been, like, oh, this pastor was doing it all wrong. Here's my critique of why he failed. It's kind of like, in some ways, like really
Yeah.
overlooks the entire point of, because the article is very much a cathartic. I mean, I can so relate to, like once being out of this system that you feel you've been a victim of, you've been treated poorly, you're traumatized, you have all this grief and sorrow, all this stuff. It would seem like it'd be really helpful to write about your emotional, status. I think a lot of us write because it's the way we process. At least that's how I generally
Mm.
write when I'm processing. But it was really interesting to read, just because it's like, I don't know if anybody else is paying attention, but there's definitely been this huge exodus that Barna and a lot of other different polls, Gallup poll, there's been a lot of different polls that have been done that seem to indicate that the future of the church is not looking super great when it comes to the current leadership
Mm.
health,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, there's so much to unpack. I wanted to go to your article real quick, and let me try to find it here. You said something. You said, I still struggle on Sundays to be present because I often have a lot on my mind, and I'm trying to my best to not totally blow it with the sermon. Or there are things I'm personally going through that make serving in church challenging, like when my dad was fighting cancer, or this past week when my grandfather passed away. It's hard to focus and be fully present when there are things on the mind and heart. And it just made me think how, um, like, that's the type of thing that you would be helping someone go through. But then
yeah.
there's almost like this lack of awareness from people that you're human too, and
Yeah.
you are going through those exact same things.
Hmm.
And it's not it's tough because there is a difference in relationship in how you sort of relate with people in the church in a way, but at the same time there's also like you have the exact same needs that they have,
Yeah. Yeah. To
and I
me, I
just
think
think it's
that's
yeah.
that's one of the
Yeah.
largest challenges. I think a lot of, I mean, it's not even just a pastor challenge; it's the church challenge, right?
Mm,
Because
mm,
the church has been guilty, and I've felt this my whole life and seen it my whole life, where we have a tendency to dehumanize pastors. In the same
yeah.
way we dehumanize, almost everybody, right? Anybody who's the
Yeah.
other, we dehumanize them. But there's this lack of awareness for a lot of people. In fact, a friend of mine and a friend of yours, Sean McMasters, who pastors a Vineyard Church in Reading, we were talking about this one time, and he just put it so succinctly when he said the general reality is that most people who attend a church expect their pastors to be 100% committed to them, 100% available, like 100% all in. But the vast majority of people who expect that from their pastors don't give that to their pastors, because as soon as they're upset about something,
Mm,
what they do is they go find a new church, or they get upset about something and they
yeah.
just leave. Because the vast majority
Yeah.
of people just ghost the church and
Yeah.
ghost you. They're just done. They don't
Yeah.
even have the maturity or the emotional wisdom to talk about it, and process things
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whatnot. But yeah, I mean, that for me, when I heard that from Sean, that was like so helpful for me, because I was like that, because I was
Mm,
trying to articulate what is the challenge I have with being a pastor. It's like, man, the expectations is the part that I addressed in the thing I wrote, because most of the time the expectations are not communicated. People get mad about, you know, um, something like, hey, I, they get mad, they leave, and then you might do something eventually, maybe. It's like, well, you didn't make it to my grandson's, I'm using an extreme example, but it's like, you didn't make it to my grandson's birthday party. And, it's like, well, I didn't know I was required to go to that. Not in a bad way, but it's like, no, I didn't even know that there was that. Because a lot of people now, it's like, well, I
Yeah.
posted it. And I'm like, literally, me, I get media as fast as I can. I might tweet something or post something, and I'm out. Like, I'm not
And then you're
scrolling for
yeah,
days.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like I just don't
yeah,
sit on Facebook, all day long. So yeah, so that's like the unwritten expectations to me is for me, and I think for a lot of other pastors is the worst challenge. It's the most hard to
yeah,
navigate because people are, and I get it. They almost, it's like you can't expect people to understand what it's like to be a pastor if they're not. You can expect empathy though. I think empathy is something you can expect in the same way that I don't know what it's
yeah.
like to be a police officer, but I have empathy for that. All the police officers I know, it's got to be challenging. It's hard, especially in the
Mm,
world that we're in now, navigating the complexities of the cultural crisis we're experiencing. It's like, I don't know what it's
yeah,
like to drive around knowing that there's a lot of people that hate me and want to kill me and that my food might be spit in,
yeah,
but I can have empathy for
yeah,
that, like, dude, thank you,
yeah,
and to the
yeah,
ladies
yeah,
that do that, men that do that, thank you.
yeah.
So yeah, those were kind of the original thoughts I had, I guess.
Yeah, it just makes me think about like contrasting it with my job as a chaplain, I'm literally paid, given in benefits and everything, to solely focus on pastoral care. Like that's it. That's all I'm focusing on. And um I'm not sort of focusing on preaching. I'm not focusing on setting up events. I'm not focused on human resources,
Mm-hmm.
marketing, trying to get patients through the door, all of that. I don't focus on none of that. And that's enough. That's more than enough. And just contrasting to what he was talking about in the article, how there's all these different roles that you have to play as a pastor. And then at the end of the day, you still have to provide care for people and you have to pastor
Mm-hmm.
people and all of that. And it almost seems like it's not manageable. It's just there's no
Yeah.
ways one person can do all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, it's almost people have these insane expectations.
Yeah.
However that comes about, that
Mm-hmm.
it's not sustainable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a good. Yeah, I mean, because thinking about my own life, I was talking to somebody about this challenge. It's somebody who's sympathetic to that in our church community, and I was saying
Mm,
the challenge for us oftentimes is, like my wife and I, we co-pastor. We have
mm,
a lot of people serving on teams and things, so we're not even, I can't even imagine. Like we have it probably as good as it can get, but even in that
yeah.
context, um, we have 5 kids who have unique things going on, who have unique challenges. It seems like when one's doing really good, another one might be struggling in life. When it's
Mm,
like there's all that. Plus, we
mm,
have moms and dads and grandparents, and like, yeah, I mean, I really don't. When I look back at the end of 2020 and 2021, when my dad was battling kidney cancer, like I don't know how I actually made it. I think that it's like God's grace, great support system. We had a lot of different reasons, but it was like, man, just managing that on a weekly basis and going back and forth to Minnesota and back here, trying to provide as much care
mm,
as I could and help out with my family. Um, it was like, man, that's all I could think about. And then you got to put together a sermon and you got to think about the different, organizational issues that you have to be addressing. And then everybody, there's certain people that just expect you to show up at their house the minute they have a need, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not complaining about that at all. It's just like,
yeah. Yeah.
you can't do it all, and there has to be
Yeah.
like some margins and some clarity on expectations and some reasonable, I guess some reasonableness about that, but I think it does come back down to like when you dehumanize pastors, it has really negative consequences, both for pastors, but also for churches and church members, because, you're never going to, I mean, you can just say your expectations will never be met because they're impossible.
Totally.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
I don't know any
and the
pastors that argue.
members, yeah, and it's sort of like the members aren't almost like living in reality at the same time. There's sort of like this, I don't want to say fantasy, but there's this reality that's just not true, that is not
Mhm.
sustainable, that with the
Yeah,
expectations and everything.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. I think that's exactly
Um,
right.
there was something else that he brought up in his article, and he brought up Dan, forgotten his name, um, Dan White Jr., and he sort of speaks about how after hearing his story and how Dan White went to the doctor and he had his brain scanned and he looked like he was a war zone veteran experiencing
Hmm.
PTSD because of the amount
Yeah.
of losses he had experienced in relationships and all
Hmm.
of that sort of stuff. And I mean, that's a pretty scary image to think about, how there's probably so many pastors that have something similar that have no idea that they're suffering that badly.
Hmm. Yeah, I think. I mean, again, as I've been, processing this, because I think that I'm kind of trying to discern that process that in my life right now. I've been in ministry
Mm,
now for like 25 years, pastored for 12 years as a senior pastor, and then now 7.5, co-pastoring with my wife. And I'm like, if I really, and having not really had like a true mainline church denominational sabbatical, in a sense where it's like you go away for 3 months and everything's paid for and you go and get like actual, um, I'm like, how am I doing? And I, it is interesting because even in our context, where most of the contexts I've been in have been really healthy and have had great, a lot of the things we'll talk about in a minute here about some of the things that will help you be able to
mm,
stick through it or stick it out and be successful or effective and,
mm,
healthy, all these different things that you want to do. Um, Even in the midst of those contexts, it's still been really challenging. And I was listening to a podcast somewhat recently, and I heard these people who used to pastor who are now, running some type of a spiritual formation type of ministry. The way that they discovered they were burned out was that they realized that when things happen that were really traumatic that they should be crying about and really upset about, they weren't. And when things that had really no bearing whatsoever on their life, they would like lose their emotions and just like totally unravel. And I was like, wow, that's like
wow.
a really interesting
Yeah.
observation, because there have been times in my life that would be 110% the case, like
Yeah.
something really personal would happen and I'd be like, whatever. And, like
Yeah.
some death, and then it's like
Yeah.
the smallest, tiniest thing would be like, oh my gosh, losing my mind. Yeah. So like, thinking about
Oh,
like, well,
wow.
or how do pastors, like if the goal for, I guess partly I should say, for some pastors, it's seasons, right? There's like maybe God calls certain people in a season of their life to serve as a pastor, and that's the extent of their calling. And maybe they raise up a new leader and they transition to serving in the marketplace, and they still love Jesus. They're still part of God's mission, but they're just not called to do that forever. Like those people, like two thumbs up. That's awesome. More power to you. But I think that the majority of people who go into pastoring, they go into it bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and really excited about the future,
Mm-hmm.
and they have every intention to last until the end, whatever that looks like, retirement, or
Mm-hmm.
until they die,
Mm-hmm.
or the rapture happens in a non-pre-tribulational way. For anybody who's listening,
Yeah.
add that to their list. Um, but then somewhere along the way, they get burned out, hurt, betrayed. They're in an unsustainable system or ecclesial environment, and it just becomes too much to bear. And they're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not happy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I wonder if we could talk a little bit about like what are some of the things that we can do as pastors to be able to do our best to prevent burnout, to prevent
Mm-hmm.
having a contextual, a context in a culture where you just get used and abused. I think that those would be helpful things to think about, because I think there's a lot of pastors out there that have taken one on the chin, in the last 3 years, even more so. I mean, like, a lot of us have watched a lot of our friends and close, pastoral peers either shipwreck their faith or have affairs or, have like their marriages be in jeopardy and then be unreconcilable in their opinion. Or, we've seen a lot of really well-known and respected leaders do unethical things or abuse people or get caught, stealing money, or, the list is, there's so many things, right?
Yeah.
And then you throw on top of that, I mean, all those things, but then those like non-localized things, but then you throw in the localized day in and day out challenges of being with people where people are dying, and you're doing funerals, you're doing weddings, you're doing marriage counseling, you're burying children's babies, you're watching people's relationships, disintegrate. You have kids that are leaving the faith or getting sucked into ideologies that are unhelpful to their well-being, or their spirituality, or whatever it is. You get all those different things that are causing people to feel the pressure. And I think like the hot term right now is to have resilience. Like every podcast on leadership is all about resilience. And that's one way. I think that's definitely an important thing, but faithfulness or sustainability or long-term models and resources that can help pastors move forward. I think that'd be something we could talk about, and pull out some resources, unless you got any other thoughts on previous.
I think that's a really good segue. I think just figuring out how to move forward, because I don't believe the option is to just stop the church. Right. It's not like we can.
I've been looking into that. It's apparently Jesus, when he said I would build. Yeah, Jesus said I will build my church, and he didn't mean like to a certain point, and then you guys are on your own.
Yeah. And I don't think there's enough Anglican churches for everyone to move into either. So, but
no comment.
Anyways, no comment. I think what you're saying, and you're right. The buzzword right now is resiliency. My biggest gripe with that word is it's a very individualistic. It's taken in a very individualistic team, like bringing on stuff internally, like that you have to do internally, rather than, I think it's more resilience. I feel comes through more external factors that you have control over placing in your life, maybe. So like, if you have a therapist, if you have coaches, if you have a ministry team, mentors, all of that sort of stuff is going to help your resiliency naturally. And it's not putting even more on you to do, because it just feels like that's another thing for you to do. Then it's like, I need to become more resilient. So that's
good. That's really good. Yeah. It's like obviously there just seems to be so many leadership podcasts and whatnot on resilience. And I think my main dislike for it is that it's become the new colloquial term that everybody uses, and it almost feels like it's the magic bullet. Everybody's always looking for a magic bullet. Like, I need the magic bullet to make my church grow or to make it. Yeah. And it's not that resilience doesn't matter, because I do think it is. It's definitely a big part of leadership. But I think you're right that left to its own devices, it is too individualistic. But it's also, again, at times it almost feels like it dehumanizes pastors too, because it sets them up to be like Superman, right? The more resilient you'll be, the more that you'll be able to, keep the faith. So what we're not saying, I think, is we're not saying that you shouldn't be resilient or that leaning into developing resilience is bad. I think we both would agree, like, that's part of our leadership development, right? But in addition to that, there are maybe some things that we can do as pastors. And I think we should maybe even say that this podcast would be really helpful for board members and church members to listen to, because some of the things that we're going to talk about really does involve them. to be able to
Totally.
help create an environment that fosters pastoral sustainability and pastoral effectiveness, and combats pastoral burnout.
Yeah.
So let's jump into that. You mentioned
Yeah.
a couple. I think one huge resource that would help pastors a lot is to have teams, people who are like actually invested in ministry and are willing to to lead and to be developed and to be coached and to volunteer and to do all that. That seems to be like a pretty good one, which for us comes out of this value of everyone gets to play, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think team ministry, I think a big one that you mentioned, which I really believe could become more and more of a thing, is really having a really solid eldership team or board team that is not only working behind the scenes, but actually is up front more, maybe, so that people are starting to see that, there's a whole team at work, not just the senior pastor. It's like, oh no, there's a lot of people that are leading in maybe ways that people didn't know. And so I think, your prime real estate, good or bad, it just is what it is a Sunday morning when everyone's together, they're experiencing and sharing the same experience in a way. And so like having regular people, your leadership team, board members, elders up on stage leading in some capacity or speaking about the church's health or whatever it is, giving updates, is probably going to help a lot, just sort of like break that association with the lead pastor doing everything.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's kind of like what. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true on a practical level too. It's like the more that people can see, I think the more that people can see a variety of voices and involvement, it's better for the health of the church in general. And that would seem very true with the board or elders or pastors. Because like for me, I think a lot of those terms are really synonymous in the New Testament. You definitely see pastors, overseers, shepherds, presbyters, elders, bishops, whatever term you want to use. They're all synonymous terms in the New Testament. But you definitely benefit from having, like the shared responsibilities, I think, for a pastor, so like typical church plant, right? It's a husband and wife, or one person who really has this vision and has this passion and starts it, and over time you're hopefully growing and you have new people coming in, and at some point in time there has to be a development of a board, the board of trustees or the board of ministry or the board of of the church board. And yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in sharing that load for sure. Because I think in our previous church in Wisconsin, we had a really strong. We early on it was a challenge, but like I think by probably year 7 or 8, it felt like our board had hit its stride. We really had like very involved board members who oversaw certain things, did certain things. And it's been a little bit longer of a development. Part of that's my own fault here, but it's like taking longer to get there. Or I guess maybe not, because we've been here for 7 years. It just took a long time. Maybe I just dragged my feet too much and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's really helpful having people that have your back and who are there to like take off the load, for sure.
Yeah.
But not just
What?
Well, I just think that it's like, so stepping beyond the board, though, you see a lot of churches that have, and there might be people right now who like, there's a pastor and he's got a board, but the board is mostly involved in finances or, like overall big picture things. So on the day-to-day ministry stuff, though, I think that's where the team ministry comes in really, really helpful, So whether it's like pastors or people who are given recognition, given a title, whatever you want to call it, who are responsible for leading something and having them share the load. So it's not one person or 2 people or even 3 people. I mean, like in our church size, 4 people is not enough to be able to carry the load of, pastoring and trying to, do this type of stuff is what I'm finding. But because even when you were on staff here, right, we had Don and I and you and Nikki, and I would say,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our team had a pretty high level of leadership capacity, and yet our
Mm-hmm.
church size was always way too large for our leadership. So, like we
Yeah,
had
we're
a
like
lot of
three,
volunteers.
400. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, I think when you guys left, we were like six something, two
Oh,
pretty full
yeah.
services. And we had like, I think we did it one time. We had like 32 different like leader type people, leading something.
Yeah.
And even that wasn't enough people.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
there's always people falling through the cracks, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
but I feel like that's a pretty big thing, so like if you're a pastor listening, being more intentional about developing leaders, big thing there.
Mm.
If you're a board member person, being more intentional to be a part of the team and share the load. If you're a person who's listening and you just go to church, maybe, pray and discern whether or not you can step in and help out and alleviate some of that. Just because a lot of that, because there's relationships there too. And I was going to say, one of the things that I think is really important for pastors is to have friends. And that is so hard. It's so hard for pastors. And it's not, I'm not making an excuse for it. I know that, because I want to tell pastors, like, dude, you need some freaking friends, like really bad. And you should have friends in your local church. I totally reject the idea that you should not have friendships with people in your church. I think that's the worst idea ever.
Yeah.
I've heard all the
I
specialists.
can't believe that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I've taken the seminary
Wow.
courses where that's taught.
Yeah.
But, you should have friendships. But
Sorry,
like,
can you just imagine telling Jesus not to be friends with his disciples? I'm sorry.
No,
I bet
totally.
just like
or that's crazy. Yeah. But that's like standard fare. It's still to this day, a lot of people teach that, where it's like, there needs to be a strong boundary between you and your congregation, and it's like, what it does is it, again, dehumanizes pastors, because you shouldn't have friends, can't have friends. And it's a totally unreasonable expectation. And again, Jesus, Paul, there's no biblical examples of that at all. Actually at all. But, but so the friendship thing is really important. Because I think having healthy friends, like, it's really, we have a number of really awesome people in our church community that, like, I go to their house and I know I can totally be myself, and I can talk about, my life sucks right now and it's really challenging, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go to church tomorrow. Like, I don't know if I can do it. I'm ready to give up, and
which is huge, because so many people, so many pastors don't have those people in their church that they feel that they can be that vulnerable with, which is huge. I was also going to say, like, make friends with non-Christians too.
Yeah. Sometimes they're the more helpful people.
Honestly, sometimes they can help you just realize, like, oh, I'm way too much in a bubble right now. I need to and they can probably provide so much clarity into things that you didn't realize, like, oh, we're just being too weird or something like that,
Totally. Or if it's really dysfunctional and unhealthy, like, sometimes they'll be like, well, that seems weird, and they'll like, oh
why are you doing that?
I have a lot of non-church, non-Christian friends that I spend a lot of time fishing with, and doing, and it's like, it's almost hilarious when they'll like ask me questions about church world, and I start explaining it to them. Sometimes they're like, oh, that's really cool, that's interesting. Sometimes they're just like, ugh. And I'm like, well, hurting people hurt people. So, yeah.
Man.
I think another resource would be therapists. You mentioned mentors and coaches. You've already said this too, but I've really taken those disciplines and those resources seriously. There's been times in my life where each one of those has been really, really super helpful for me to be able to, like, process through. After 2020, like, a therapist was almost, I would say kept me in, because I was like, at the end of 2021, our church had literally lost 300 people, who just totally ghosted, and then a lot of them said all these crazy things about me, which weren't even true at all, about my alleged political leanings, and all these things are going on. My dad gets cancer. I'm like I'm at the time was like, oh, I think my dad's going to pass away. It's pretty much, I was praying and trusting God, but I was also like not seeing a whole lot of positive stuff. Our family was going through a lot of stuff too. Some of my kids were really going through some, well, they all went through 2020, the COVID pandemic stuff. So that was really hard for them. It was crazy. And then I've got, church stuff, and man, just processing that with an actual trained therapist who was able to ask me questions that helped me like see things in a new way was like the most freeing thing that I could have done. And then having like coaches when I'm going through a situation, like, or a mentor, it's like, I don't really know how to handle or navigate this issue in pastoring. And it's like getting that perspective is really, really super helpful. And you've kind of experienced each one of those as well. How's that been helpful for you? Not that you're a pastor anymore. You left and went into pastoring.
You
left pastoring to pastor. you left pastoring to go be a pastor.
Yeah. Gosh, no, I've had a therapist too. Haven't really had too much of the coaching mentor side, but definitely had a therapist. And I also just want to say you don't need a Christian therapist. I didn't have one, and I had a Buddhist therapist, and I actually found that way more helpful in many ways. I mean, he was very respectful, and he knew how to navigate that well. But just, I think having that person coming from the outside and just like attempting to understand me and then ask questions about, my relationship to God and stuff like that in a non-judgmental way, just a curious way, actually helped me more. Instead of someone assuming that they knew stuff already about me and my faith because they have the same faith, if that makes sense. So, I also just want to put that out there. I will say as well, I've told, being outside and not being a pastor anymore and sort of being more of just like a member, I've helped lead small groups and stuff, but I do know that, and I've said this to, shout out to Marshall, the pastor at my church right now, but I realized that I have found when he's like named stuff that's happening both for him and the church, like up from the pew, it's been super refreshing. And just like, that's awesome to like, one of the biggest things I learned in chaplaincy training was just naming the obvious in the room, which sometimes is the hardest thing to do. But just being willing to name what's happening in the church community or what you're going through personally as a pastor sometimes can be the scariest thing, but actually can be the most beneficial thing.
I hate that.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Oh, you do?
So here's my reason why
Okay, this is good.
Folks listening are going to be able to experience you and I processing my
go for it.
Hatred for. Okay, so this goes into a deep-seated. So I hate Pastor Appreciation Month. Like, I hate it. And as I've been processing why I hate that, it started out originally, I think I was like, I just thought it was really dumb and annoying that you had to like put something on the calendar to appreciate someone that supposedly means a lot to you. Like when I was a kid, like I was very fortunate as a kid. We had, like, I grew up when I was a kid, I saw this guy named Mike King of this church in Colorado was like the greatest pastor I could ever. I mean, he just was involved, and I just saw him all the time. He was at small groups, he was at weddings, he was at picnics, and just really super involved in people's lives. Like I do think that everybody in our church community, I just saw everybody appreciated him. Like he was deeply loved, and it was like obvious. And so I just kind of think I grew up with this value for that. Then I become a pastor, and I find out like my first year that, oh, well, we have to give you a plaque and a gift card for dinner because it's Pastor Appreciation Month. And it just seems so, like, part of me feels like that's just so like, ugh. Like it actually makes me as a pastor feel more unappreciated than nothing, because I'm like, well, what about in February or July or and it just seems like, so that's probably my primary reason. But so here's the catch though. is, and you'll know because you were here. Like have primarily not been a fan of it, but when you guys were on staff, during October, Don and I always made sure to appreciate all our pastors and like I don't know, we gave you like gift cards to something, whatever.
Yeah.
Because on the other hand, too, it's like it's also not good to not do anything in October because I think then you walk away like, well, they don't even appreciate me enough to do something in the 1 month that they're supposed to. So I've got 25 years now, or I got 12. I've got nearly 20 years of like senior pastor, and I honestly can think of like 2 or 3 times where there was actually a thing done, where I was like, oh, that actually I felt appreciated in that moment. Most of the time it's like super awkward, because it's like, oh yeah, we heard on the radio or we saw on TV or somebody asked us today if we're going to do something for you. So here it is. Or it's just, like really awkward. So, I don't know why we went into that. What did you do?
I think you missed. I think you missed what I said. Because so what I'm talking about is like so for instance,
I'm so angry and bitter that I
Pastors Appreciation Month. Yeah. Well, I was listening to you and I was like, I think we've I
am processing it. Yeah. Because here's the part. I want you to clarify in a minute here, but part of it's like, I just don't know if it's actually helpful for pastors. The reason why I brought this up, probably because I literally just had a conversation with somebody about this from our church, because they were asking why aren't you cool with it? And I just was telling them, I just hate, it just doesn't feel like appreciation. Like it doesn't actually for me, but maybe it does for other people. And here's probably, okay, you want to know why I'm also bitter? Let me tell you more reasons why I'm bitter. Okay. I also I got all these friends that are pastors out at Assembly of God churches or anything but the Vineyard. And they'll have these moments with oh yeah, man, for pastor appreciation today, I got a brand new car. And I'm just like, are you kidding me?
What?
Yeah. Or, oh yeah, we got a full expenses paid. My wife and I and our 3 kids are being flown to Florida to go on a cruise. And man, our church just loves me. And I'm like, dude, I got a gift card for $50 at Starbucks that I used to buy people in church coffee. Like, what is going on here? You're laughing.
Maybe I don't need to drink alcohol.
No, that's when I'm like, I definitely could be Assembly of God. Initial evidence and spirit baptism, subsequent to salvation. Will check the box. Whatever. Let me in.
Give me that car.
Yeah, exactly. As I'm driving, as when we first started pastoring, Don and I are driving a minivan that was 25 years old and barely ran, and the battery was always dead.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. Okay, no. So what I'm to clarify, what I'm saying is,
I need you to therapize me.
Okay, all I'm saying is that if there's been changes in the church and they're not recognized from the stage, it sometimes can add to the problems, if that makes sense. So for instance, like COVID, if there's a bunch of people that left the church but no one says anything, that's not going to help. That's what I mean.
Oh, hold on. I went on welcome listeners to the. Okay, I got a lot going on right now. Okay, no, I know my point now.
Yes. At the best time. That's brilliant.
Hold on.
Close. It was sort of close.
You were talking about vulnerability. Okay.
So it is a sense of vulnerability, because for a lot of pastors, it's hard to talk about people leaving the church or there being big changes in the church or something like that,
or things that they're facing. Yeah, that's actually what I was going to come to. Okay?
Yeah.
Here's what I was getting. This is why I was talking about pastor appreciation. I didn't get to finish my thought because I went on a tangent as to why I think it's so dumb and so annoying. Is what invariably happens anytime a pastor is vulnerable, which they need to do. I'm not at all saying that they don't. Mm-hmm. But the challenge for me has been in the past, it's like if I get up and say, hey, it's been really hard lately. You know, there's some things in my personal life that Don and I are both really, we're feeling the pressure of it in our home. We're feeling the pressure of it in other areas. You know, we have some friends going through this, whatever it is, you know, my dad, my mom, my sisters, whatever, grandpa, grandma, or like, hey, you know what? The church we're going through something right now. I mean, I think everybody's feeling the economic, challenge right now. Like giving's down almost everywhere that I have talked to pastors, but like to talk about that and you're like, I'm really discouraged. Then what happens most of the time is that elicits a bunch of people to reach out to you to say, hey, we're really praying for you. We really value you. We really appreciate you. And then that's where it stops, is like, there's generally a text or a card or, you know, maybe a phone call. And it's not a long-term sustainable model of providing support or encouragement for me, I guess would be the best way to put it. You know,
Gotcha.
It almost feels like patronizing, where it's like, okay, so in this moment, you feel a little guilty about the fact that I'm going through this. Therefore, you want yourself to feel better by knowing that you reached out and you know, So that I guess that's my point. So, and the point I was trying to get to is how Pastor Appreciation Month. That's kind of how it feels. And I know it's not just me. I've talked to a lot of different pastors who, it's like it's hard to not feel that way because you know, like you just go on Facebook and you know you're your PCUSA pastor or your Baptist Southern Baptist pastor's like, man, we got a new car, I got a new MacBook Pro, or you know, whatever it is. And then yet it doesn't, like, there's no long term. Like, I just don't feel like one thank you will get you through 365 days of challenging cultural context. So like on one hand, this is where it's like, well, you need to be more resilient, Luke. You need to develop your resilience, Luke. If you were a resilient leader, you'd be able to survive off that manna from October in February and March. But I guess, you know, I don't know if that's a long-term model that actually is as effective as we think. And I just would like to say that maybe I wonder if there's other models or other ways that boards or churches could actually maybe think through that a little bit on how they could support their pastoral staff. Because like I was thinking about this the other day too. Here's the challenge I've got at times is, like, I think there's a lot of people who would argue that a senior pastor's job is to manage staff or pastor staff or, you know, like leader, you know, coach leaders or, I don't know, whatever they're supposed to do. Well, I don't know if people can do that if they don't feel appreciated themselves.
Yeah.
You know, like I wonder if they're so like insulated from this feeling of like being ignored or taken for granted that they aren't able to do that very well. I think that those have been issues I've struggled with in the past. You know, again, I'm not at all right now, but as I've thought about it, it's like, I wonder if some of those things are part of the reason why pastors are starting to like, you know, resign, because it's like, everybody says it's a thankless job. You know, you're storing up treasures in heaven, you know, whatever spiritualized form. So give me your feedback, give me your credit. Why am I wrong? I
don't think you're wrong. No, I don't think you're wrong. And I think what I'm thinking about when I was saying that was more naming, not sort of like going up on stage and like talking about what you're struggling with. I think it was more thinking through, like, I think it's helpful for like what's affecting the whole group as a group that everyone's sort of aware of, but no one's talking about, if that makes sense. So I think I'm thinking about that more, like the pastor being able to name
like the state of the church, like the state of the church.
The state of the church. Okay. Yeah. So if the church is declining and the church doesn't want to decline, like, it actually might be helpful to be like, hey, like, let's talk about this and name it, because everyone is noticing it. Do you know what I mean? So I think I'm thinking that is something that is vulnerable for a pastor to do and can be scary for a pastor to
Mm-hmm.
do. And so that's what I'm thinking about, is sort of going, that is, and you do need support as a pastor. And when I'm thinking about the support you probably need then institutional denominational support to help guide you through that. Hopefully,
Or
like
maybe just
if you're
a
part of
really good gift. Maybe just a really good gift in October for your
maybe a really
appreciation.
good, like a car. Yeah, that would help. That
Okay.
would go a long way.
What you're talking about, totally. I think they're good.
I think what you
comment on what I'm saying as far as the vulnerability factor of pastors. Yeah.
So this is what I'm thinking about. So there's I'm thinking psychologically now. There's a psychological or therapeutic technique that this
are you doing it right now with your eyes?
Sort of has pioneered. Yeah.
You're like, there's a
look
technique.
into my eyes. Yeah, look into my eyes. So she, as a therapist, part of what she feels like is part of the healing process for her patient is for her patient to get to a place where the patient can recognize her as a human. So she has this quote that says this way, or this philosophy, demonstrates that liberation comes not only through being recognized, but also doing the recognizing. So I'm wondering, what are ways, and I'm not saying I have an answer for this outside of a therapeutic, but in a pastor setting, what are ways in which pastors and churches and leadership teams can invite one another as the church to both recognize one another? And by the way, recognize is not the same as acknowledging. Recognizing goes past acknowledging. It's not like you're just acknowledging someone's feelings or someone's emotions. You're actually seeing them as a full human being, and then you're allowing yourself to be affected by them. And I think there's probably something there for a church community and pastors to figure out ways in which they can invite the church community to see them and recognize them as they're recognizing the church community. I don't know how, because you're right. Like a pastor going up on stage and like trauma dumping or like talking about how they're struggling doesn't work. And it probably, the church doesn't know what to do with it. They're like, what do we do? Do we need to be worried? The pastor then is like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, regrets it, and it's awkward. I'm not saying that's the solution, and I totally agree with you. I don't think that's the solution.
That goes back to you should have friends who you can, because I look at it like an onion, the layers. Like there's certain people who you can be more vulnerable and more authentic with, and then there's other people who are not safe, both for you or for them. Like they cannot handle. I mean, I just know there's some people who go to church, like the idea that their pastor, I'm not talking about like pastor's perfect, because that goes back to like this idea of they're not human. I think we need to be human. We need to be vulnerable in the sense of like, we're not perfect. We need to be ourselves. But like, if there's a certain level of vulnerability that I think that actually is unhelpful for some people in certain contexts. Right. So that's where the margins and the boundaries I think comes in, that's, I guess that's because this is going to be the best podcast for anybody, because we're literally having two different conversations about almost the same thing. As I'm like, Pastor Appreciation Month is terrible. By the way, it's next month. Get your pastor a car. Get your pastor a car. Yeah. But yeah, so that, because that kind of goes, we had been talking about communication with the church about what's going on, but something else that came up was this idea of communicating with the church like reasonable expectations, because that's my big thing. Is I just think that people have it's not even just unrealistic expectations, for sure that, but oftentimes it's uncommunicated expectations. So it's like, I expect my pastor to ... Didn't call him, didn't text him, didn't email him, not him, but her, could be her too. Did not reach out to them and ask them, to help me in this way or to do that. And I'm, because just the assumption oftentimes is I do think that a lot of people honestly think that pastors just work on Sundays. Like I think they really deep down do, right? Because I'll have people like, I'll be like working on something for church, and so like whether it's like working on a sermon outline or studying the Bible so I can try to teach it in a faithful to the scripture way, or I'm doing something churchy, and then someone will walk in from the church and will be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to bother you, but can we talk?" I'm like, "Oh, absolutely." Like, slide my Bible over, what's going on, and they'll tell me all their things and their thoughts and what they're struggling with or going through. And then after we'll spend like an hour and a half or 2 hours talking, they'll say, "Oh, well, I'll let you get back to work." And I'm like, "Well, what do you think I've been doing for the last 2 hours with you?" And I don't mean that and like I'm working now and it's not at all like I'm not connected. But it's like, that's the challenge with vocational ministry, is that no, this is the work. Like what I do as part of my job, as part of my role in my vocation, the way that I live is by meeting with people. I mean, that's pretty much 85% of my week is with people. So it's just interesting because like, I think there are these really unreasonable expectations or these uncommunicated expectations. And that, in my opinion, is what's killing pastors. That's what I think is really getting to the point where they're
totally agree with you.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that could definitely be part of it. Like having like almost like an open discussion, like with the church, being like, these are all the things I do. I can't do all of these things well. I believe that these are the things that God is calling me to do. And even invite it to the community and be like, if you guys would rather be me focus on HR and not do pastoring, then let me know. Then, yeah, great. I'll focus on HR.
If you just need a graphic designer, I mean, let's just talk about it.
Let's talk about that. Yeah. So I think that actually might be part of the solution. I'm thinking about the conference we went to at Phoenix.
The large church, the Vineyard
Brian,
large church
conference. The main thing I took away from that was the way in which Brian, what's his name? Gosh,
Brian Anderson.
Brian Anderson. The way that they approached communication, and they said clarity over confidence or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just they focused on clarity. They were like, we want to be very clear about what we're wanting, what we're going for, how we're going to get there, and all of that. And I took that away because that could be applied to any church size. That doesn't need to be a big church strategy. I think it's probably just good to be so clear about what you're doing, what you're expecting, and what you can do, what you can't do, all of that sort of stuff. And then, if stuff doesn't work out, you could still talk about it. Be like, we wanted to do this and we failed. If you're honest about it, I'm pretty sure most people will be like, yeah, that happens or whatever, and that's sort of, I'm thinking about John Wimber too. And I think one of the genius ways that John Wimber introduced his vulnerability was talking about his emotions as he was doing stuff for God. And he sort of a lot of the time made humor about it, but a lot of it he was talking about I was so angry at God, or I was so scared, or whatever. That's inviting people to see his humanness in his pursuit of God. And I think that is sort of part of it too. But anyways, those are just my thoughts thinking out. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. Gosh, I think we've mentioned, so again, resources for pastors, for church boards, for church people. Because I think even if you take a pastor out, not take a pastor out to lunch, buy them lunch, do whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, buy them a car.
Buy them a car. Yeah, I must be really bitter about that because it's in my heart. Yeah. But going out and letting them know hey, I want you to know I value you and I love you. And again, that is, I can truly say in my context, I can think of 10 people right now that I could say, these people, I know they love me, they support me. They are there for me. I can process things with them. I mean, they're just phenomenal. I don't ever feel like I have to not be me, and that's been huge for our resilience and sustainability and ongoing commitment to the kingdom. But So we mentioned, teams, everyone gets to play, trying to delegate and build teams that can carry the load. We talked about therapists, coaches, mentors, again, friendship, communication with the church about what expectations are reasonable, where people can get a hold of you, clarity. I think that's so good. And then one resource that I want to mention to those listening is Peter Scazzero's book, Healthy Emotional Spirituality. Like, I just think that book is one of the most important books in the last probably 10 years, 15 years of ministry, because it puts on your radar ways to have a barometer check, like, how am I doing? Are these the things that are motivating me? These are the things that maybe are influencing my decisions. Are these it's so good. Like, I don't think that folks could, and he's got, emotionally healthy leaders, emotionally healthy churches. They're all kind of the same thing off the emotionally healthy spirituality, but I would highly recommend that book to everybody. I recommend it all the time. What are your thoughts on that book?
Yeah, I love that book. I think it's so good. I mean, it's just opened the door to this massive conversation that's been going on ever since he sort of wrote that book. And now you've got other guys like Steve Cuss and, talking about shame and narcissism and all these other guys that are sort of writing, and girls, that are writing on this because it's so important, understanding our emotions with God and stuff. So
yeah, I just, gosh, I can't recommend that book enough. I was just looking at it right on my Kindle right now, and I'm like, man, there's every one of these chapters has been at certain times in my life. I'll even go back and read them, and I'll be like, oh man, that's so good. For me, I honestly, I think one of the things that was so helpful for that book was chapter 8. It's this idea of discover the rhythms of the daily office and Sabbath. So it's like taking time to stop and breathe. And for me, I now use the daily office. I read my Book of Common Prayer every day. And then also the Sabbath concept of rest, like I feel like I'm doing pretty well with that, where I have plenty of time within my week, because it's not just even one day. Lance Pitlick, who, pastored in the vineyard at the Anaheim Vineyard before it was stolen by Alan Scott and Jeremy Riddle and their wives. True. But Lance, once I was processing him with after our church had grown a bunch, and I was like, man, my life is crazy. And he said something along the lines of, like, there's some days where you just need to punt. And I was like, what is that? Like, he's like, yeah, if you're going through something really, and like, you need to just take the day, cancel everything and go to the beach, go do it. And I was like, really freed from that, because I noticed that was happening to me, where I was like, dude, I'm so stressed out, and I have a million things to do. And there were days where I was like, you know what? I just I'm taking a personal day. And again, it's other jobs have different challenges. I just think that pastoring, dealing with people, the emotional bandwidth that is required, the capacity that happens for people, like no one knows, right? Like, Wes, wouldn't you agree that the only people everybody can be empathetic, can have empathy towards pastors or police officers or doctors or soldiers? Like, we can all do that, but no one can really understand what pastors go through unless they've done it.
Yeah,
true.
It's very true.
It's like, yeah. I mean, it was so good for you. You were like, forget this, I'm going to become a chaplain, which is like really a terrible move on your part, because it's doing the same thing. Only you don't have to deal with any of the drama, any of the problems, any of the challenges, and you get healthcare. So I think you won.
And I get healthcare,
I think you won. Yeah.
I didn't even know chaplaincy was a thing before I started it. So there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was that's a good place to land this plane, unless you wanted to process Pastor's Appreciation Month anymore.
I do have other thoughts on it. I did write a piece on it. I'm going to publish my piece on it.
You should.
I want to say thank you to all of our listeners, though. It's been really great having people engaged. And so I'd like to encourage anybody, if you're listening and you've got thoughts, we'd love to hear them. I mean, Wes and I both check out the comments, so you can leave them both on the YouTube. We have the YouTube video of this conversation. You can also listen to it on, all the places you get your podcasts from. But let us know what you think about this. And then we'd love to encourage you to think about becoming a subscriber for our Substack, which is linked below. I'm writing fairly regularly. Wes is promising to someday write regularly, but he has a new child, so he is trying to figure that out, I'm sure.
We're getting there. Yeah, we're getting there.
All right, thanks for listening. Shout out to John again. Thank you so much for the music. I mean, the Barnetts are legends, and so we're really thankful for that. So we'll talk to you guys soon.